Hi guys, welcome back to Ash Talks Basketball, and today we are ranking the best player all time from every team. And without further ado, let's get into the video. In at 30, I have Ja Morant for the Memphis Grizzlies. They've had a short history and not much to pick from. There were options like Mike Conley or Zach Randolph, but I went with Ja Morant. He's a young, up-and-coming player, although he's having troubles with the social media side of basketball. He's still an impressive athletic player and an amazing point guard for the Grizzlies in the last few years. In at 29, I've got Anthony Davis of the New Orleans Pelicans. He was great for New Orleans while he was there in the late 2010s, almost winning an MVP one year, but was later traded to the Los Angeles Lakers in 2019, and he still remains to be there to this day. In at 28, I've got Bob McAdoo of the Los Angeles Clippers. Back when he played, they were called the Buffalo Braves and ended up relocating and rebranding multiple times, eventually to the Los Angeles Clippers. I could have picked someone like Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, or Blake Griffin for this spot, but I think they all weren't there for long enough to really identify themselves as a Clipper for the main part of their career. In at 27, I've got Kyle Lowry for the Toronto Raptors. He may have not been as impressive as the last few players in his career, but he was consistent. He was with them for a long time. I could have picked someone like Vince Carter or Kawhi Leonard who won them a championship, but Kyle Lowry was there for the ups and lows. He was the partner for DeMar DeRozan, a perfect partner for Kawhi Leonard in that championship, and I think he deserved this spot as the best Raptor of all time. In at 26, I've got Elvin Hayes for the Washington Wizards. He was absolutely dominant for the Wizards in the 70s, just beating out Wes Unseld for this spot. In at 25, I've got Julius Erving. He was one of the most athletic players of his era in the early 70s and really dominated for teams like Brooklyn and Philadelphia in the early stages of the NBA. In at 24, I've got Patrick Ewing for the New York Knicks. He was amazing for them, one of the most dominant centers of his era in the 1990s, one of the best Knicks players of all time. Just struggled to beat out of some of the best and all-time greats of the NBA. In at 23, I've got Dominique Wilkins for the Atlanta Hawks. He was an absolute offensive masterpiece, one of the most athletic players of his era, could score on all three levels, and was an absolute destructive offensive player. In at 22, I've got Russell Westbrook. He was great on Oklahoma, and a lot of people have forgotten about how great of a player he was after those Lakers years, and I still think he can go back to it in the right system. And he was an absolute offensive masterpiece, winning a MVP, averaging one of the most impressive stat lines I've ever seen, a 30-point triple-double. In at 21, I've got Damian Lillard. He was always loyal to the Blazers and has been there his whole career, one of the best clutch shooters ever, will always provide scoring when you need it, and I'm sad to see him leave the Blazers, but to win a championship, I think it's what's best for his career. In at 20, I've got Allen Iverson for the Philadelphia 76ers. Although he wasn't there long, he almost won a ring for them, went to the finals almost on his own, and was one of the best offensive producers of the 2000s. He may have left soon, but he was still one of the best Philadelphia 76ers of all time. In at 19, I've got Reggie Miller for the Indiana Pacers. He was a potent shooter, especially for the 1990s, and really helped the Indiana Pacers, staying there his whole career, but just didn't manage to win a championship with them, and that kind of lowered his rating on this list. In at 18, I've got Isaiah Thomas for the Pistons. He was one of the key parts of the Bad Boys Pistons era and won multiple championships in the late 80s and early 90s. In at 17, I've got Steve Nash for the Phoenix Suns. He was an amazing distributor of the ball, and him and Amari Stoudemire led to some very impressive records for the Phoenix Suns in the late 1990s and early 2000s, and he was liked it so much in Phoenix he came back after going to Dallas. In at 16, I've got John Stockton of the Utah Jazz. Him and Karl Malone made one of the most impressive pick-and-roll duos ever, and they were one of the best duos ever created, but bad luck for them. They played while Michael Jordan was playing and was never able to get a championship during the Malone and Stockton era. In at 15, I've got Nikola Jokic, one of the best distributors at his position and a great scorer, especially for his offensive capabilities. He is an amazing player to run a even and team-led offense and led the Denver Nuggets to their first ever championship. In at 14, I've got Shaq for the Orlando Magic. He might have not been playing in his prime in Orlando, but he was still a bold, dominant player, one of the strongest players you ever see, and kept on breaking backboard after backboard in Orlando, almost winning them a championship in the late 90s. In at 13, I've got Dwayne Wade. He may have not been the best Heat player of all time, but he was there a long time. He led them to multiple championships, and he was the all-time Heat best player, one of the best defensive guards of his era, an amazing scorer, and was always ready to lead his team when necessary. In at 12, I've got Chris Paul for the Charlotte Hornets. He was great in his rookie season. He might have not played his prime there, but he was still one of the most impressive players out of his draft class, an amazing distributor, and a lock-in Hall of Famer. In at 11, I've got Kevin Garnett for the Minnesota Timberwolves. One of the best power forwards of all time. May have not got much help in Minnesota, but he was still an amazing player there. One of the most dominant rebounders and scorers out of the four position. Eventually was traded to Boston and went to go get his championship, but still an amazing player in Minnesota. In at 10, I've got Oscar Robertson. Personally, I think he's the third best point guard of all time. Great player for Sacramento and helped Kareem and the Bucks win a championship in the early 70s. In at 9, I've got Giannis Antetokounmpo of the Milwaukee Bucks, an absolute powerhouse, winning Milwaukee a championship in 2021. Some might think Kareem takes this spot, but I think he had his true prime in Los Angeles, and as long as Giannis stays in Milwaukee for a bit longer and more of his career, I think he's got this spot locked up as the best all-time player for Milwaukee. In at 8, I got Hakeem Olajuwon for the Houston Rockets. The obvious pick, one of the most dominant centers of all time, a great shot blocker, a great scorer, and was able to win a championship for the Houston Rockets in the 90s. In at 7, I've got Steph Curry for the Golden State Warriors. The best shooter of all time, most three-pointers made, led the Warriors to multiple championships, and one of the best players of all time. In at 6, I've got Bill Russell for the Boston Celtics, an all-time great defender and an all-time great winner, winning 11 championships in his day, and an all-time great for Boston. In at 5, I've got Dirk Nowitzki, an old-time Mavericks great, winning them a title in 2011. He was there his whole career till he was in his 40s, and one of the best scorers to ever play for the Dallas Mavericks. In at 4, I've got Tim Duncan for the San Antonio Spurs, a Spurs lifer, the great fundamental, won the multiple championships in the 2010s, and the best power forward of all time. In at 3, I've got Kobe Bean Bryant, a Lakers lifer, one of the best players of all time and a killer mentality on all sides of the ball, a great two-way player and one of the all-time greats. In at 2nd, I've got LeBron James for the Cleveland Cavaliers. He was a great player for Cleveland, bringing a championship home after he came back from Miami, but he hasn't been there his whole career, like number 1, Michael Jordan, the GOAT, and a Bulls lifer, there's not much to be said. MJ easily takes the number 1 spot. And that's all I have for you today. So thank you for watching the video and have a nice day.